The 5-case model was developed in the UK and has continued to be developed over the past 20 years. It has been used in Guernsey for the last few years and was introduced to New Zealand a couple of years ago also. The reason, or one of the reasons that it's been used, is in order to obtain consistency in business cases for capital expenditure. Using the 5-case model has created substantial savings, as is borne out by UK Treasury figures. Not only substantial savings, but also increased benefits, both monetary and non-monetary benefits. The 5-case model for business cases is a thought process, not a tick box exercise. And what we are asked to do when writing a business case is answer 5 questions. The first question, which we look at in the strategic case, is what precisely are we doing? Crucially, why are we doing it? What will be the outcome? And how does it fit with our other policies? Now, this is the strategic context. We have to know where we are to ascertain how to get to where we want to be. One aspect of this is a recognition that what we provide in the public sector is services, not assets. We're not necessarily here to build a hospital or build a school. What we are here to do is to provide a healthcare service or an education service, one of the options of which may be to build a hospital or a school. But it is the service that we are providing that we need to focus upon and not the asset. In terms of the economic case, we ask the question, what is the public benefit in this? What are the options to provide the benefits? The public benefit includes obviously both monetary to a certain extent and non-monetary benefits. And we'll talk about those a little bit later on how we might measure monetary and non-monetary benefits to the public. And we look at the options. And this looking at the options and assessing them against the objectives that we've set in the strategic context falls into the economic case. The commercial case asks the question, can we really purchase the things needed for delivery at an affordable price? That may seem simple. In some cases it is. In most cases, though, it isn't. And it's an acceptance that procurement is often an issue, particularly in the public sector. And it is thinking about that aspect at the outset of the business case that it is vitally important. I'll give you an example. In the world of IT, pretty much everything we do in the public sector is innovative. Even if it is taking off-the-shelf software, we are developing it, we are changing it for our own benefit and for our own devices. Therefore, it is innovative. And it is usually grossly underestimated the amount of effort and the amount of change that goes into an IT project, for example. The financial case asks, how can this be paid for and what will it cost? So this is the hard figures. Also, it looks at the funding options. How can this be paid for? We'll talk further. Is it entirely government money? Is it private sector? Is it third sector? Is it a combination? Is it other options? Social finance, for example. And finally, the 5th case is the management case, and this talks about how can this be practically be delivered and what robust plans have we to achieve this. We can talk about project management, program management, MSP, etc. But again, it's not a tick box exercise, because without effective implementation, our project and program will be worthless. So what is the process of decision making? First of all, we have to understand what the vision is. What is a vision? A vision is a postcard from the future. It is an aspiration. It is where do we want to get to. Often a vision may well be ambiguous. It may not be completely specific, and it won't necessarily be entirely measurable in itself. However, it is important to understand the vision, to understand the context overall of what you are trying to achieve. Next, we need to understand what are objectives. Our objectives are more specific. Some of these objectives may be critical. Some of them may be preferable, but not absolutely required. But we do need to know what our objectives are in order to assess whether what we are doing or whether our preferred option is the best option. Next, we do need to understand what our strategy is. Our strategy is how we get to where we want to be and how we achieve what we want to achieve. Once we have a strategy, we can look at our options. And there will be lots, and I'll talk a little bit further about that later. There will be lots and lots of options. We then look at appraisal. So we are appraising our options against our objectives. These elements come into the economic case and can be dealt with in a fairly straightforward manner, in actual fact, providing that the thought process and the work has gone into it appropriately. Once we have appraised our options, we will have a preferred option, although we will spec out other options as well. We then move to our decision, which will commonly be made at a political level. Before it comes back to us to implement. Now, if we are not clear on our vision, our objectives, and our strategy, we're not necessarily going to come up with the best options, and we're not going to be able to appraise those options. And therefore, the decision makers are going to be badly briefed. It's very common for politicians to be blamed for poor decision making. However, if they are poorly briefed, how can they make a decision? If they're poorly briefed, that is your fault and not theirs. So ensuring that we have all of these elements to the process is absolutely vital. Now we talk about the ROMEF framework, and in essence, we start off with our rationale. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is what are we doing? Most importantly, why are we doing it? We then look at our objectives, as I mentioned. We appraise those objectives. We then enter into decision making and implementation, during which we are monitoring the project or program. And this is an area where the process can fall down. Monitoring may happen, but unless it is appropriately evaluated and feedback comes into play, then the monitoring is largely worthless. So we have to have evaluation of the projects, and that may well be post-implementation reviews. But if that is the case, they need to feed back into the strategy and the rationale at the top level in order to inform future decisions. Obviously, that becomes very critical when we're looking at programs, because programs are ongoing. Now, talking of which, let's say we have our strategy. Let's say we have a transport strategy, as an example. What then is a program? Look it up on Wikipedia if you like. But a program is usually a series of projects. A program usually runs for a considerable amount of time. And a program has outcomes of which are usually underlying projects. So a program is normally a series of connected projects. So if we've got a transport strategy, and part of that strategy is to look at public transport, we may have a public transport program of which perhaps the objectives may be to increase the usage of public transport in your particular jurisdiction. Underneath the public transport program, and out of that thought process, will come numerous projects, one of which might be a bus service, another of which might be a train service, etc. Now, potentially, the bus service itself could also be another program, as it may have underlying projects within it also. So, for example, under a bus service program, or even though it's sitting under the main public transport program, we may have bus routes, we may have the bus fleet, and then we may have some asset programs that could potentially interlink with other projects and programs across the jurisdiction. So a program is a series of projects, and the program is ongoing and continually monitored and evaluated. The projects are individual, and they are dealing with individual matters. And once it is delivered, its output, the project is over. But the programs continue. Okay, so there are 3 stages to the development of a business case. If you like, 3 drafts. There is the strategic outline case. That is the first draft. In the strategic outline case, we would expect to see a long list of options. These are examined, and an approach is identified, and a short list of options is proposed. So the long list of options are analysed against the objectives in broad terms. And it may be the case that a lot of the outlying options are discounted and can be discounted at an early stage because of that broad brush approach to the appraisal. Once the strategic outline case has been completed, a decision is made to conduct a detailed appraisal of the shortlist. So at this point, we do not have a preferred option, we simply have a short list of options. Therefore, the various different elements of the business case will not be complete. The financial case will not be complete because we do not have a preferred option. The management case will not be complete as we don't necessarily know what we're going to implement at this stage. Likewise for the commercial case. Moving on to the second draft, this is called the outline business case. This is where the shortlist is analysed and a preferred option is identified. So the shortlist is analysed in detail against the objectives and against the critical success factors. The outline business case, once that has been produced, is the point normally where decisions are made. This is where it will go to politicians to make a decision. So the decision is made then to hold detailed commercial negotiations. So throughout the development of the outline business case draft, we may be having some soft market testing, but we will not be holding detailed commercial negotiations. The third and final draft is the full business case. So we have the decision to undertake commercial negotiations, and a commercial deal is done in order to enable delivery. And the financial case is fully completed, the commercial case and the management case are then fully completed, and at the finalisation of the full business case, the final decision to go ahead and sign contracts occurs. The one scenario where the three stages do not apply is with regard to smaller projects, normally, and for these we often use a business justification case. Now this is a single stage. It has varying detail relating to the complexity of the project that we're looking at, but it is one document, one stage. Commonly, BJCs are used under programs where the programs are very concise and detailed, whereby a decision has effectively already been made to implement a number of projects, and the BJC is simply fleshing this out and ensuring that it is on track and in accordance with the program. Okay, so we start off with the strategic case. This is fundamentally the case for change, and this needs to be compelling. Now, what happens often when people are writing business cases is that they do not believe that they are dealing with change. Even if you are replacing an existing service, or indeed most commonly an existing asset, there is still an element of change, because you are opting not to choose an alternative route to achieving what your aims are. In order to ascertain and to justify our case for change, we need to understand the context of policies and of course the vision. If we do not know where the vision is, and if we do not have the context of policies, and by policies I mean local, national, international, potentially, if we don't know the environment that we are working within, then we cannot justify our case for change sufficiently. So, we need to spec out our background. What are we working with here? Let's give an example of a waste strategy, a waste program, for example. What are we going to do with our waste? Well, what are we doing at the moment with our waste? And my recommendation, for example, in a strategic case, if it were to do with waste, is how much waste are we producing and what are we doing with it? Are we recycling? Are we putting it in a hole in the ground? Are we burning it? So how much is going where? Then we look at our rationale of what is trying to be achieved and why we are trying to achieve it. So again, let's use waste as an example. What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve a better disposal methods of waste, more efficient, perhaps more environmentally friendly. Why are we trying to achieve it? Perhaps it is because our landfill is coming close to being full, for example. So that is perfectly good rationale for a case for change. Within the strategic case, we have to establish our objectives. Now, our objectives must be SMART. And I appreciate it is an overused acronym, but in this case, it is extremely relevant. It is where I see business cases go wrong constantly when objectives are not specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time constrained. So by specific, and my recommendation here is if you have drawn up an objective, go and ask 3 people what they believe this objective means. If you get more than one answer, then there's a problem. The objective is too ambiguous, it is not specific. Measurable can often be difficult. However, a metric can be obtained for virtually anything. Whether it be in your own jurisdiction or whether it be a metric that may have been created in another jurisdiction, it may not be the perfect metric for what you're trying to achieve, but if it's the best fit, at least it can be measurable. And that is why, of course, we need to ascertain where we are at the moment, because we need to ascertain where we're going to go and whether we've got there or not, or to what extent we've got there. So the objectives must be measurable. They need to be achievable, so not unrealistic. And by achievable also, we come back to specific. They do need to be understandable. For example, saying that you want a better integrated bus service. What does that mean? That means ask 5 people, you'll probably get 5 different answers. That means all sorts of things to all sorts of people. Better integrated might mean more buses. It might mean more routes. It might mean more subsidies so that it's more socially inclusive, for example. It's not specific, and because it's not specific, it can't be measurable. And because it's not measurable, it's not necessarily achievable, debatable whether it's relevant, and it's certainly not time constrained. So objectives are absolutely critical to the entire business case. And this is where I would recommend workshopping objectives, ideally with colleagues from outside your own department so you can get different perspectives on what you are trying to achieve. Failing that, at least colleagues within your own department who are not directly related to the project or programme will be useful sounding boards to ascertain whether your objectives are consistent and whether they are specific. Bearing in mind that we are assessing all of our options against our objectives. So if our objectives are wrong, our option choices will be limited and no doubt wrong. Now, some of the objectives may be critical success factors, but not all. Some objectives may be black and white answers. It may be a yes or a no as to whether any particular option is achieving that objective. But also other objectives will be on a scale of achievement, which is perfectly fine. How many objectives do you need? However many is relevant. You may have only 2. You may have 20. Putting in objectives that are ambiguous in order simply to bulk out the number of objectives is never going to get anywhere. And it simply confuses the reader of the business case, at the very least, and confuses the decision making. So, I personally would start an entire business case with what are my objectives. Once we've understood the strategic context, the background, the environment with which we're working in, Then we are looking at our objectives, and then we know what we are attempting to achieve. And from that point, we can move on to the economic case and the options. So the definition of the economic case is public value. Are we obtaining public value? Are we obtaining value for money? By that, what we need to do is ascertain the costs and benefits that are associated with the options that are available to us. The costs and benefits need to include the economic costs, the social costs, the environmental costs, and frankly, any other costs and benefits that you can think of. Quantifying benefits and indeed quantifying costs in terms of monetary should be relatively straightforward. However, quantifying non-monetary benefits, or those that appear to be non-monetary, can be difficult. I'll give you an example. Let's look at a project to put in an arts program into prison, which is one I looked at recently. The business case writer was struggling to ascertain how he could measure the benefits of an arts program in a prison, until I pointed out that arts programs have been put into prisons in many, many other jurisdictions, and it has resulted in a lower likelihood of reoffending. The cost of reoffending, both monetarily and societal costs, are very well documented. Certainly both in the US, most European countries, Australia, and indeed the UK, and those costs are available. Every jurisdiction, therefore, should have an approximate, at least, cost, a figure that they can put on a benefit that is a reduction